The whisper that changed everything. Boston, Massachusetts, present day. The annual Winter Gala at Boston Children's Hospital was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, where Boston's elite mingled among ice sculptures and white floral arrangements. Daniel Harrison adjusted his bow tie as he surveyed the room. At 38, he had become accustomed to these events. The polite conversation, the discreet discussions of donations, the subtle displays of wealth. As the founder of Harrison Technologies, he'd built his fortune developing privacy software that had become the industry standard. Now he spent a significant portion of that fortune on philanthropy. Mr. Harrison, so glad you could make it. Dr. Margaret Chen, the hospital's chief of pediatric oncology, approached with a glass of sparkling water. Your donation is funding our entire new research wing. Daniel smiled, brushing back his dark hair that was just beginning to gray at the temples. It's the least I can do, Dr. Chen. My mother would have appreciated knowing her battle with cancer might help these kids. Someday. Would you like to tour the children's ward? Some of our patients are still awake and would be thrilled to meet you. Daniel checked his watch, just past 8. I'd be honored. The pediatric oncology floor was a stark contrast to the opulence downstairs. Despite the cheerful murals and colorful decorations, there was no disguising the serious work done here. Daniel followed Dr. Chen through the quiet hallways, stopping occasionally to greet children who were awake. In the last room at the end of the hall, a small girl sat up in bed, a sketchpad balanced on her knees. She couldn't have been more than 8, with delicate features and auburn hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Something about her struck Daniel immediately, a sense of familiarity he couldn't place. This is Lily, Dr. Chen said softly. One of our bravest patients. Lily, this is Mr. Harrison. He helps make sure our hospital has everything it needs to make you better. The girl looked up, and Daniel felt a jolt of recognition. Those eyes, a distinctive hazel with flecks of gold. He'd seen them before, in a different face, years ago. Hello, Mr. Harrison, she said with surprising composure for a child her age. It's nice to meet you, Lily. That's a beautiful drawing. He gestured to her sketchpad, where she'd been working on an intricate landscape. It's where I want to go when I get better. The mountains where the eagles fly. That sounds wonderful. Daniel pulled up a chair beside her bed. Have you seen eagles before? Only in pictures. My mom had a book about them. A shadow crossed her face. Before she went to heaven. Dr. Chen touched Daniel's shoulder. I need to check on another patient. I'll be back in a few minutes. Left alone with the girl, Daniel felt an unexpected ease. There was something about her that seemed oddly familiar, though he was certain they'd never met. My grandma says I look just like my dad, Lily said suddenly, studying his reaction. Did you know him? I don't think so, Daniel replied, confused by the question. Who was your dad? Lily shrugged, returning to her drawing. I never met him. He went away before I was born. Grandma doesn't like to talk about him. I'm sorry to hear that, Daniel said gently. Lily continued coloring, adding careful detail to a pine tree in her mountain scene. After a moment of companionable silence, she spoke again without looking up. I heard Grandma on the phone once. She was crying. Lily's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She said, I paid him to disappear, and now Emma's gone too. The girl looked up, her hazel eyes serious. That's my mom's name, Emma. Daniel felt a cold rush of adrenaline. Emma what? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Emma Walsh, but my last name is Stevens, like my dad. Lily tilted her head. You look funny, Mr. Harrison. Are you okay? The room seemed to tilt slightly. Mark Stevens. It couldn't be. Mark had been his roommate at Harvard, his best friend, and his sister Rebecca's fiancé until he vanished without A trace, 15 years ago. The disappearance had nearly destroyed Rebecca, who had been 2 months away from their wedding. And those eyes, now he recognized them. They were Mark's eyes, distinctive and unmistakable. "Your father's name is Mark?" Daniel asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Lily nodded. "Mark Stevens. Grandma has one picture of him that she keeps locked in her desk, but I found it once. He has eyes like mine." Dr. Chen returned, bringing with her a nurse who needed to administer Lily's evening medication. Daniel excused himself, promising to visit again, his mind racing with implications. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, trying to process what he'd just learned. Mark Stevens had a daughter who just told him that her grandmother, who must be Emma's mother, had paid Mark to disappear. The same Mark who had vanished without explanation, breaking his sister's heart and leaving his friends bewildered. Before leaving the hospital, Daniel found the nurse who had been caring for Lily and discreetly asked about her family situation. "Lily Walsh Stevens has been with us for 3 months now," the nurse explained. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, but she's responding well to treatment. Her grandmother, Catherine Walsh, is her legal guardian. Her mother died in a car accident about 3 years ago, and from what I understand, the father has never been in the picture." "Catherine Walsh," Daniel repeated. "Does she live in the Boston area?" "Yes, they have a house in Brookline. Mrs. Walsh comes every day around noon and stays until evening. She's very devoted to Lily." Daniel thanked her and headed to the elevator, pulling out his phone. A quick search confirmed what he already suspected. Catherine Walsh was the widow of Richard Walsh, the founder of Walsh Pharmaceuticals, a company that had been acquired by a larger corporation about a decade ago. The Walshes had been prominent in Boston society, though Daniel, being younger and focused on technology rather than pharmaceuticals, had never crossed paths with them. As his car navigated the nighttime streets of Boston, Daniel made a decision. After 15 years of wondering what had happened to his friend, he finally had a clue, a whispered confession overheard by a child. Mark hadn't simply abandoned them all. Something more complicated had happened, and Daniel was going to find out what. For Rebecca's sake, for Lily's sake, and for Mark, wherever he was. Chapter 2. Reopening Wounds. Manhattan, New York. 3 days later. The offices of Wilson and Patel occupied the 42nd floor of a sleek skyscraper overlooking Central Park. Daniel sat in a leather chair across from James Wilson, his corporate attorney and one of his oldest friends. They'd met during Daniel's first year at Harvard, when James was already in law school, and had maintained their friendship through the years. "Let me get this straight," James said, leaning back in his chair. "You want to reopen an investigation into Mark Stevens' disappearance based on something a sick child said she overheard her grandmother say on the phone?" Daniel nodded, tapping his fingers on the armrest. "I know how it sounds, James. But you didn't see her. This girl, she's Mark's daughter, I'm sure of it. She has his eyes, that same unusual hazel color. And you think her grandmother, this Catherine Walsh, paid Mark to disappear 15 years ago? That's what Lily overheard, and it makes a twisted kind of sense. The timing matches. Mark vanished without a trace 2 months before he was supposed to marry Rebecca. The police investigation went nowhere. No body, no evidence of foul play, no financial trail suggesting he'd planned to leave. He just evaporated. James sighed, running a hand over his closely cropped hair. "Daniel, I remember what Mark's disappearance did to Rebecca. To all of you. But reopening this, you could be stirring up a lot of pain for nothing." Daniel's mind flashed back to those terrible days after Mark vanished. The desperate searches, the flyers posted around campus, the increasingly frantic calls to hospitals and morgues, and Rebecca, his vibrant, confident sister, reduced to a hollow-eyed ghost, waiting by the phone for news that never came. Rebecca never really recovered, James. She's successful, sure. Her design firm is doing well. She dates occasionally, but there's a part of her that's still waiting for answers. And now there's a little girl fighting cancer who's never known her father. James was silent for a moment, studying his friend. You're not going to let this go, are you? I can't. Then you need professional help. Not me, a private investigator who specializes in cold cases. James pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. There's someone I worked with on a corporate espionage case last year. Former FBI, very discreet, very thorough. Her name is Alexandra Reyes. Daniel took the information, grateful for James's help despite his reservations. One more thing, James added as Daniel stood to leave. Have you told Rebecca about any of this yet? Daniel shook his head. Not until I have something concrete. You know how she is. She built walls around this part of her life a long time ago. I don't want to tear them down unless I'm sure. Be careful, Daniel. Whatever happened 15 years ago, someone wanted it to stay hidden. Enough to pay a man to abandon his entire life. Alexandra Reyes's office was a far cry from the corporate luxury Daniel had just left. Located in a converted industrial building in Brooklyn, it was functional rather than impressive. A deliberate choice, Daniel suspected, to put her clients at ease. Alex herself defied expectations. Daniel had imagined someone older, hardened by years in the FBI, but the woman who greeted him was around his own age, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp, assessing eyes. Mr. Harrison, she said, offering a firm handshake, James told me you have an unusual case. Please call me Daniel, he replied, taking a seat across from her desk. Then I'm Alex. She sat down, folding her hands on the desk. So, you're looking into a 15-year-old disappearance based on a child's overheard comment. The skepticism in her voice was evident, but not unkind. Daniel spent the next half hour explaining everything. His friendship with Mark, the engagement to Rebecca, the mysterious disappearance, and his recent encounter with Lily. Alex listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When he finished, she tapped her pen against her notepad. Most missing persons are either found within the first 48 hours or not at all, she said finally. After 15 years, the trail is beyond cold. It's practically fossilized. I understand that, but this isn't a typical missing person case. If what Lily overheard is true, Mark didn't just disappear. He was paid to leave. By Catherine Walsh, the grandmother. Alex flipped through her notes. Widow of Richard Walsh, pharmaceutical magnate. What would be her motive for paying your friend to abandon her daughter and your sister? I don't know yet, but Walsh Pharmaceuticals was a major company. Maybe Mark discovered something he shouldn't have. Speculation, Alex pointed out. We need facts. She studied him for a moment. This will be expensive, Mr. Harrison, Daniel, and I can't promise results. Money isn't an issue, and any answers are better than none. Alex nodded slowly. All right, I'll take the case, but we do this my way, methodical by the book. No confronting Catherine Walsh or anyone else until we have something substantial, and you need to prepare yourself and eventually your sister for the possibility that whatever we find won't bring closure. Sometimes the truth just leads to more questions. Daniel agreed to her terms, relief washing over him at having taken concrete action. They discussed logistics and payment, and Daniel provided all the information he had about Mark's disappearance, old police reports, contact information for mutual friends, the few newspaper articles that had covered the case. As he was leaving, his phone rang. The screen displayed his sister's name, and Daniel felt a twinge of guilt. Rebecca had always been perceptive, especially when it came to him. Somehow, she must have sensed something was up. I need to take this, he told Alex, who nodded and stepped away to give him privacy. Hey, Becca, he answered, trying to sound casual. Daniel, his sister's voice was sharp with suspicion. Why are you asking questions about Mark? Daniel closed his eyes, leaning against the wall. Of course, news had already gotten back to her. Boston's social circles were tight, and Rebecca had maintained many of their college friendships. "Who told you that?" "Eleanor Winters called me, said you'd been asking about the weeks before Mark disappeared." "What's going on, Daniel? It's been 15 years. Daniel took a deep breath. "I need to see you in person, Becca. There's something you need to know." The silence on the other end was heavy with apprehension. "This better be important, Daniel. You know what happened the last time someone thought they'd seen him in Chicago." Daniel remembered all too well. 3 years after Mark's disappearance, a former classmate had called Rebecca, convinced he'd spotted Mark at a conference. Rebecca had flown to Chicago the same day, spent a week searching, only to discover it had been a case of mistaken identity. The experience had sent her spiraling into depression again, undoing years of healing. "It's not like that," Daniel assured her, "but it is important. I'll fly up to Boston tomorrow. We'll talk then." After hanging up, he turned to find Alex, watching him with a thoughtful expression. "Your sister?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "She already knows something's up. I'm going to have to tell her about Lily. Family complications make these cases harder," Alex commented. "But sometimes they're also the key to solving them." She handed him her card. "Call me after you've spoken with her, and Daniel, be prepared. This case is going to reopen a lot of old wounds before we're through." As Daniel left the building and stepped into the bright New York afternoon, he knew she was right. But some wounds had never truly healed in the first place. They'd just been carefully hidden away, waiting for the day when someone would finally seek the truth. Chapter 3. The First Clues. Cambridge, Massachusetts. The next day. Harvard. Yard hadn't changed much in the years since Daniel had graduated. The same brick buildings stood in dignified formation. The same paths crisscrossed the grounds where students now hurried between classes, bundled against the November chill. Walking these familiar routes with Alex beside him, Daniel felt an odd sense of déjà vu, as if at any moment he might turn a corner and see Mark walking toward them, backpack slung over one shoulder, ready with a sarcastic comment about Daniel's corporate ambitions. "This is where you and Mark met?" Alex asked, breaking into his thoughts. "Freshman year, we were roommates in Holworthy Hall." Daniel pointed to a red brick building across the yard. "Complete opposites. I was the serious computer science major. He was studying economics, but spent most of his time organizing protests and challenging professors. Somehow, we balanced each other out." "And your sister?" "Rebecca was a year behind us, studying architecture. She met Mark at a party I dragged him to. They were together from that night until..." Daniel trailed off. "Until he disappeared." Alex finished. "You said you were meeting Professor Winters here." Daniel nodded, checking his watch. "Eleanor Winters. She was Mark's academic advisor and mentor. If anyone would know what was going on with him before he vanished, it's her." They found Professor Winters in her office in the economics department, a cozy space lined with books and adorned with artifacts from her research trips around the world. Now, in her 60s, Eleanor Winters had lost none of the sharp intelligence that had made her one of Harvard's most respected economists. "Daniel," she greeted him warmly, embracing him before turning a more assessing gaze on Alex. "And you must be Ms. Reyes. Please, sit down." Once they were settled, Professor Winters regarded Daniel with a mixture of affection and concern. "I spoke with Rebecca yesterday. She's upset that you're stirring this up again." "I know, I'm seeing her this evening." Daniel leaned forward. "Professor Winters, Eleanor, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have good reason." Briefly, he explained about meeting Lily and what she'd overheard. Professor Winters listened intently, her expression growing troubled. "A daughter," she said softly when he finished. "Mark has a daughter he's never known." "Did you ever meet Emma Walsh?" Alex asked. or hear Mark mention her? Professor Winters shook her head. No, but that doesn't mean much. Mark kept his romantic life fairly private, especially after things became serious with Rebecca. She rose and walked to her window, looking out at the campus. What you're suggesting, that Mark was paid to disappear, it's hard to reconcile with the young man I knew. That's why we're here, Daniel said. In the weeks before he disappeared, did Mark seem different, worried about anything? The professor was quiet for a long moment. He did change, she finally acknowledged. About 2 months before he vanished. He became withdrawn, distracted during our meetings. I assumed it was pre-wedding jitters or stress about his graduate school applications. Was there anything specific that concerned him? Alex pressed. Actually, yes. Professor Winters returned to her desk and sat down. Mark was involved in a research project, a statistical analysis of clinical trial data for a new pharmaceutical. It was a prestigious opportunity, especially for an undergraduate. The company was Walsh Pharmaceuticals. Daniel and Alex exchanged a look. Richard Walsh himself had funded the research. Professor Winters continued. Mark was initially thrilled, but then she frowned, trying to recall. About 3 weeks before he disappeared, he came to my office very agitated. He said he had ethical concerns about the project. When I asked him to elaborate, he said he needed to verify some findings before making accusations. Did he ever tell you what those concerns were? Alex asked. No. The next time I saw him, he seemed calmer, said he might have been mistaken. But looking back, I don't think he was reassured. I think he was scared. One more question, Daniel said. Did Mark ever mention having a relationship with anyone other than Rebecca during this time? Professor Winters looked troubled. Not directly, no. But there was an incident about a week before he disappeared. I was working late, and I saw Mark arguing with a woman in the parking lot. It was intense enough that I almost intervened, but they separated before I could approach. The woman drove away in an expensive car. I remember because it was a Bentley. Unusual even for Harvard. Could you describe her? Alex asked. Middle-aged, very well dressed. I only saw her from a distance, but she had reddish hair, similar to what you described this little girl having. Daniel nodded slowly. That could have been Catherine Walsh, Emma's mother. As they left the professor's office, Alex was already making notes on her phone. So Mark was working on research for Walsh Pharmaceuticals, had ethical concerns, and was seen arguing with a woman who might have been Catherine Walsh a week before he vanished. It's a start that leads straight to Walsh Pharmaceuticals, Daniel pointed out. Yes, but companies that size generate mountains of paperwork. We need to narrow our focus. Alex checked the time. You said you're meeting your sister. Tonight, I'm going to start digging into Walsh Pharmaceuticals' history, see if there were any red flags around the time Mark disappeared. And I need to prepare Rebecca for what's coming, Daniel said grimly. She's not going to take this well. Rebecca's loft in Boston's South End reflected her success as an architect and interior designer. Open and airy, with clean lines softened by carefully chosen textiles and art pieces. At 37, she remained strikingly beautiful, with the same dark hair and blue eyes as Daniel, though her features were finer, more delicate. She greeted him with a quick hug that did nothing to disguise the tension in her shoulders. You are stirring up trouble, she said without preamble, leading him to her living area. Why, Daniel, after all this time? Daniel accepted the glass of wine she offered, gathering his thoughts. There was no easy way to say this, so he opted for directness. Mark has a daughter, Becca, a little girl named Lily. She's 8 years, old and being treated for leukemia at Boston Children's Hospital. Rebecca froze, the color draining from her face. What? Gently, Daniel explained about meeting Lily, her resemblance to Mark, and what she'd overheard her grandmother say. Rebecca listened in stunned silence, tears gathering in her eyes. Are you sure? she whispered when he finished. Absolutely sure she's his. I'm having DNA tests done, but yes, I'm sure. She has his eyes, Becca. Exactly his eyes. Rebecca set down her untouched wine glass and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. So he left me, disappeared without a word, and started a new family. No, that's not what happened. Daniel joined her at the window. Lily was born after he disappeared, and based on what she overheard, Catherine Walsh, Emma's mother, paid him to vanish. Why would she do that? And why would he take money to abandon everyone he loved? Rebecca's voice broke. I spent years blaming myself, Daniel, wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. I don't know why yet, Daniel admitted, but I've hired someone to help find out, a former FBI agent named Alexandra Reyes. Rebecca turned to face him, anger flashing through her grief. You should have told me before you did this. You had no right to make this decision without me. You're right, and I'm sorry, but I knew how painful it would be for you, and I wanted to have something concrete first. So what now? You and this investigator are going to track down Mark based on a child's overheard comment? We're going to find the truth, Daniel said firmly. For you, for Lily, for all of us who were left behind. Don't you want to know what really happened? Rebecca was silent for a long moment. I built a life without those answers, Daniel. A good life. I know you did. You're the strongest person I know, Becca. But that little girl deserves to know her father, and you deserve to know why he left. Rebecca closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. Does she look like him? She asked softly. Yes, Daniel said, his voice gentle, but she has her mother's smile. Emma died 3 years ago, car accident. Lily lives with her grandmother now. She's alone, Rebecca murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. Then, with a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders. I want to meet her. Are you sure? It's going to be emotional, and she's Mark's daughter, Rebecca interrupted. That makes her family, whether he's in her life or not. And no child should face cancer without all the support they can get. Daniel smiled, pride swelling in his chest. This was the Rebecca he knew, fierce in her compassion, uncompromising in her loyalty, even when it cost her emotionally. I'll arrange it, he promised. And Becca, whatever we find out about Mark, whatever the truth is, we'll face it together. Rebecca nodded, wiping away her tears. Find him, Daniel. Find him and make him explain why he left us all behind. Chapter 4. The Reluctant Reunion. Suburban Boston. 1 week later. Catherine Walsh's home in Brookline was exactly what Daniel had expected, a stately colonial set back from the road, surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens now dormant in the approach of winter. The house spoke of old money and established position, values that had defined the Walsh family for generations. Nice place, Alex commented as they waited in Daniel's car for Rebecca to arrive. She'd spent the past week investigating Walsh, pharmaceuticals history, and Catherine Walsh's background, finding threads that were beginning to form a pattern. Are you sure about this approach? Confronting Catherine directly is risky. She could shut us down completely. We're not confronting her, Daniel corrected. We're visiting Lily. With Catherine's reluctant permission. The hospital arranged it, part of Lily's emotional support during treatment. And your sister is okay with this? She's nervous but determined. Daniel checked his watch. She should be here any minute. As if on cue, a silver Audi pulled up behind them. Rebecca emerged, elegant in a camel coat, her dark hair loose. Around her shoulders, Daniel could see the tension in her posture as she approached their car. I'm not late, am I? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Right on time, Daniel assured her, getting out to give her a quick hug. Rebecca, this is Alexandra Reyes, the investigator I told you about. The two women shook hands, sizing each other up. Daniel speaks highly of you, Alex said. He mentioned you were former FBI, Rebecca replied. I hope that means you're good at getting to the truth. It's what I do best, Alex confirmed, though I should warn you, sometimes the truth is more complicated than we expect. Rebecca nodded, her gaze shifting to the house. Let's get this over with. The doorbell chimed sonorously when Daniel pressed it. Moments later, the door was opened by a uniformed housekeeper who led them to a formal sitting room decorated in shades of blue and gold. Catherine Walsh rose from an armchair. As they entered, her posture rigid with barely concealed hostility. At 65, Catherine Walsh remained an imposing figure, tall and slim, with carefully styled auburn hair showing only hints of grey. Her resemblance to Lily was evident, though Catherine's features were sharper, her hazel eyes cooler. Mr. Harrison, she greeted Daniel without warmth. I agreed to this visit for Lily's sake, but I want to be clear. I don't appreciate you using your position as a hospital donor to insert yourself into our lives. Mrs. Walsh, Daniel replied evenly, thank you for allowing us to visit Lily. This is my sister Rebecca Harrison and our friend Alexandra Reyes. Catherine's gaze lingered on Rebecca, a flicker of something. Recognition? Guilt? Crossing her face before her expression hardened again. Miss Harrison, I've seen your work featured in Architectural Digest. Very impressive. Thank you, Rebecca said, her voice steady, despite the emotion Daniel knew she must be feeling. Standing in the home of the woman who might have been responsible for Mark's disappearance, facing the grandmother of Mark's child, it had to be overwhelming. Lily is in the sunroom, Catherine said, after an awkward pause. She's been talking about your visit all week, Mr. Harrison. She doesn't get many visitors besides her doctors and nurses. She led them through the house, expensively furnished, but lacking warmth, more showcase than home. Family photographs were notably absent, except for a few formal portraits that appeared to be of Catherine and an older man, presumably her late husband. The sunroom at the back of the house was a different world, bright and cheerful, filled with plants and comfortable furniture. Lily sat curled up on a window seat, reading a book. She looked smaller outside the hospital, more vulnerable in her home environment, but her face lit up when she saw Daniel. Mr. Harrison, you came! She scrambled up, wincing slightly from the movement, a reminder of her illness. I promised I would, Daniel smiled, bending down to her level. And I brought some people I'd like you to meet. This is my sister Rebecca and our friend Alex. Lily greeted them politely, but her gaze lingered on Rebecca with unmistakable curiosity. You're very pretty, she said finally, like a princess in a book. Rebecca knelt beside Daniel, her eyes suspiciously bright. Thank you, Lily. That's very kind of you. Why don't you show our guests your art projects, Lily? Catherine suggested, her tone softening when she addressed her granddaughter. I'll have Maria bring in some refreshments. As Catherine left the room, the atmosphere immediately relaxed. Lily eagerly showed them her drawings and the small crafts she'd been making during her recovery periods between treatments. Rebecca, Daniel noticed, seemed unable to take her eyes off the girl, drinking in every detail of her face, her mannerisms, the sound of her laugh. Do you like architecture? Rebecca asked when Lily showed them a particularly detailed drawing of a fantastical castle. This has some very creative design elements. I like buildings, Lily said seriously, and bridges. When I grow up, I want to build the tallest skyscraper in the world. I'm an architect, Rebecca told her with a smile. I design buildings for a living. Lily's eyes widened. Real ones that people live in. Real ones, Rebecca confirmed. Maybe sometime I could show you some of my drawings if your grandmother says it's okay. Grandma likes architecture, Lily said. She has a whole bunch of magazines with buildings in them. Daniel, sensing that Rebecca and Lily were bonding, caught Alex's eye and nodded toward a bookshelf across the room. They moved away, giving Rebecca space for this emotional first meeting with her almost niece. "Interesting house," Alex murmured, pretending to examine the bookshelves. "Lots of family history, but almost no family photos." Daniel nodded, scanning the shelves himself. "I noticed that too. It's like Catherine's trying to erase certain parts of—" He stopped abruptly, his attention caught by something on a lower shelf. Partially hidden behind a decorative vase was a small silver picture frame, placed as if someone had tried to conceal it while not quite being able to put it away entirely. Daniel picked it up, his breath catching. The photograph showed a younger Emma. Lily's resemblance to her was striking, with her arm around Mark. They were standing on what looked like a beach, smiling at the camera, but there was tension in Mark's posture, a wariness in his eyes that Daniel recognized. The photo had been taken shortly before he disappeared. "Find something?" Alex asked, moving closer. Daniel showed her the photograph. "That's Mark and Emma, Lily's mother." Alex studied it carefully. "They look happy, but stressed. Where was this taken?" "Cape Cod, maybe. Somewhere on the New England coast." Daniel turned the frame over, finding a date written on the back, August 12, 2010. This was taken just a month before Mark disappeared. Before they could discuss it further, Catherine returned, followed by the housekeeper carrying a tray of refreshments. Her eyes immediately went to the photograph in Daniel's hands, her expression darkening. "I see you've been making yourself at home with my personal belongings," she said coldly, setting the tray down with more force than necessary. "I apologize," Daniel said, not entirely sincerely. "I was admiring your bookshelves and noticed the photograph. Is this Emma and Mark?" Catherine took the frame from him, her knuckles white where she gripped it. "Yes, from a long time ago. It was taken just before Mark disappeared," Daniel pressed. "Did Emma know him well?" "Mr. Harrison," Catherine said, her voice tight, with controlled anger, "I agreed to let you visit Lily because the doctors thought it would be good for her to have more social interaction. I did not agree to be interrogated about my late daughter's past relationships." Rebecca, who had been helping Lily with a drawing, looked up at the tension in Catherine's voice. "Mrs. Walsh," she said quietly, "I understand your desire for privacy, but Mark Stevens was my fiancé. He disappeared without a trace 2 months before our wedding. Surely you can understand why seeing him in a photograph with your daughter raises questions." Catherine seemed taken aback by Rebecca's direct approach. For a moment, something like guilt flickered across her face. "Grandma, can Miss Rebecca come see my room?" Lily asked, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. "I want to show her my books about buildings." Catherine hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, dear. But remember, you need to rest soon. You have treatment tomorrow." As Rebecca followed Lily from the room, Catherine turned back to Daniel and Alex. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Mr. Harrison, but I would appreciate it if you would leave my family alone. Lily has enough to deal with without being caught up in ancient history." "Mrs. Walsh?" Alex spoke for the first time, her tone professional but firm. "We're trying to find answers about a man who vanished 15 years ago, leaving behind people who loved him, a man who, it appears, is Lily's father." "What exactly is your role in this, Ms. Reyes?" Catherine asked sharply. "I'm a private investigator specializing in cold cases. Mr. Harrison has hired me to look into Mark Stevens' disappearance." Catherine's composure slipped just for a moment. That case was closed years ago. The police found nothing. "New evidence has come to light," Alex said carefully. "Evidence suggesting Mark didn't leave voluntarily." "What evidence?" Catherine demanded. Daniel stepped forward. "Lily overheard you on the phone, Mrs. Walsh. She heard you say, 'I paid him to disappear, and now Emma's gone too.'" All color drained from Catherine's face. For several seconds, she seemed unable to speak. Then, with visible effort, she gathered herself. Children misunderstand things they overhear, she said stiffly. Lily has an active imagination, especially since her mother's death. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on her. She tires easily. Catherine left the room, her back rigid, leaving Daniel and Alex exchanging significant looks. She didn't deny it, Alex noted quietly. Not directly. No, she didn't, Daniel agreed. And did you see her reaction when she first saw Rebecca? She recognized her. We need to tread carefully, Alex warned. Catherine Walsh has resources and influence. If she feels cornered, she could make this investigation very difficult. Daniel nodded, his attention caught by movement outside. The window. In the garden, a gardener was working, seemingly oblivious to the November chill. Something about his methodical movements seemed odd for the season. Alex, he said quietly, that man outside, is he actually gardening? Or is he watching the house? Alex glanced out, her expression sharpening. Good catch, that's not a gardener. The way he's positioned, the fact that he's working in this weather, I'd say he's security, keeping an eye on the property. Why would Catherine Walsh need that level of security? That, Alex said grimly, is exactly what we need to find out. When Rebecca returned with Lily, the little girl was animated, chattering about Rebecca's promise to bring her books about famous buildings. Rebecca herself seemed emotionally drained, but smiling, having clearly formed a connection with the child. Catherine accompanied them to the door, her manner still cool, but slightly less hostile. Lily enjoyed your visit, she told Rebecca. She doesn't have many women in her life since Emma died. She's a remarkable child, Rebecca replied. Smart, creative, you must be very proud of her. Something softened in Catherine's expression. She's everything to me, especially now. As they were leaving, Daniel turned back. Mrs. Walsh, we're going to continue our investigation into Mark's disappearance. It would be easier with your cooperation. Catherine's face hardened again. There's nothing I can tell you, Mr. Harrison. That chapter of my daughter's life closed long ago. But it didn't, did it? Daniel pressed. Not if Lily is Mark's daughter. Not if you had something to do with his disappearance. Catherine stepped closer, lowering her voice so Lily, who was showing Alex a flower in the front garden, couldn't hear. Listen to me carefully. There are things you don't understand, things better left alone. For Lily's sake, for your sister's, and Jake, let the past stay buried. Was that a threat, Mrs. Walsh? Daniel asked quietly. A warning, Catherine corrected. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free, Mr. Harrison. Sometimes it puts everyone you care about in danger. Before Daniel could respond, Catherine closed the door, leaving him standing on the steps with her cryptic warning echoing in his mind. Chapter 5. Hidden Truths. Boston to Chicago, the following week. The journal was small, bound in faded, blue leather, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Emma Walsh's private thoughts lay exposed before them, a window into the past that might hold the key to Mark's disappearance. Where did you get this? Alex asked, examining the journal carefully. Lily gave it to me as we were leaving, Daniel explained. She'd hidden it under her mattress, said her grandmother didn't know she had it. It belonged to Emma. They were in Alex's temporary office, a suite she'd rented in a Boston hotel to serve as their investigation headquarters. Rebecca sat across from them, her expression a mix of apprehension and determination. And you're sure it's authentic? Alex pressed. The dates match, Daniel confirmed. It covers the period from about 6 months before Mark disappeared to shortly after. And there are photos tucked between the pages, Emma and Mark together. Rebecca reached for one of the photos, studying it with complicated emotions playing across her face. He looks different, she said softly. Thinner, worried. That matches what Professor Winters told us, Alex noted, turning back to the journal. Let me read some key entries aloud, and we can discuss what they might mean. She flipped through until she found the first mention of Mark, dated April 2010, approximately 5 months before his disappearance. Met M today at the research symposium. Brilliant, passionate about ethical practices in drug testing, reminds me there are still people in this industry who care about more than profits. Asked him to coffee next week to discuss collaborative research possibilities. That would have been while Mark was still with you, Alex told Rebecca. The entries for the next couple of months suggest a professional relationship that gradually became personal. Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she nodded for Alex to continue. Alex skipped ahead to July 2010. M is becoming paranoid about the Renovax data. Says the efficacy results don't match the raw numbers. I tried to convince him to take his concerns through proper channels, but he doesn't trust the review board. Says too many of them have financial ties to WP. He doesn't understand the pressure I'm under from Dad. Renovax, Daniel repeated. That was Walsh Pharmaceuticals' blockbuster drug for heart arrhythmia, wasn't it? Alex nodded. Approved by the FDA in early 2011, shortly after Mark disappeared. It became their flagship product until the company was acquired in 2015. The entries through August grew increasingly concerned. M showed me his analysis today. If he's right, the Renovax trials are significantly underreporting serious side effects. 3 patients died during extended trials, but their deaths were attributed to pre-existing conditions. M is talking about going to the FDA directly. I don't know what to do. My loyalty should be to my family's company, but if people are being harmed. And then in early September, just weeks before Mark vanished, Dad confronted me today. Somehow he knows about M and me. He was furious, not just about the relationship, but because he's figured out M is investigating Renovax. He made threats I've never heard from him before. I'm scared for M, for myself. What have we gotten into? The entries became more frantic. As September progressed, M says we need to leave, that it isn't safe. He's gathered evidence, made copies, hidden them somewhere. He won't tell me where, says it's safer if I don't know. He's going to end things with then we'll go together. To the authorities. I don't know what to believe anymore. That's referring to you, Alex told Rebecca gently. Must be Rebecca. Rebecca stood abruptly, walking to the window. So while he was engaged to me, planning our wedding, he was having an affair with Emma Walsh and planning to run away with her. It seems more complicated than that, Daniel said carefully. Based on these entries, Mark discovered something dangerous about Walsh Pharmaceuticals, something worth threatening him over. The last entry is the most revealing, Alex said, turning to the final page with writing. It was dated September 28, 2010, 3 days before Mark disappeared. Mom knows everything. She came to my apartment tonight, more upset than I've ever seen her. Said Dad is taking care of the problem and that I need to end things with M immediately. When I refused, she broke down completely. Said there are things I don't know about the company, about Dad, about what he's capable of. She begged me to convince M to drop the investigation, said she could make arrangements that would keep everyone safe. I don't know what that means, but the look in her eyes terrified me. 3 days later, Mark vanished, Daniel said quietly. And based on what Lily overheard, those arrangements Catherine mentioned may have involved paying Mark to disappear. But that doesn't make sense, Rebecca argued, turning from the window. Mark would never have abandoned his principles for money. If he found something wrong with Renovax, he would have exposed it, not taken a payoff. Unless, Alex suggested, carefully, The alternative was worse, if Richard Walsh was taking care of the problem in a more permanent way. You think Mark was threatened, Daniel realized. That Catherine offered him money to disappear as an alternative to her husband, having him killed. It's a theory that fits the evidence, Alex acknowledged. But we need more than theories. We need proof. She closed the journal thoughtfully. Emma's entries mention Mark making copies of evidence about Renovax. We need to find those copies. Chicago, Rebecca said suddenly. Daniel and Alex turned to her. Mark made several trips to Chicago in the months before he disappeared, Rebecca explained. He said it was for graduate school interviews, but he was always vague about the details. I remember because it was unusual for him. He was typically so open about everything. Alex was already pulling out her laptop. Chicago makes sense. It's far enough from Boston to be secure, but not so far that he couldn't travel there easily. She began typing rapidly. I'm checking for connections between Mark and any research institutions or regulatory agencies in Chicago. While Alex worked, Daniel turned to his sister. Are you okay, Becca? This is a lot to process. Rebecca's expression was complex, hurt, anger, but also growing resolve. I'm processing the fact that the man I was going to marry was having an affair and planning to leave me, but I'm also processing that he might have been in danger, that he might have been trying to do the right thing by exposing a dangerous drug. She took a deep breath. And there's Lily. Whatever Mark did or didn't do, she's innocent in all this. She's his daughter, which makes her family. Daniel squeezed her hand, proud of her strength and compassion, even in the face of painful revelations. I've got something, Alex announced. Dr. Nathan Clark, professor of pharmacology at Northwestern University Medical School. He co-authored a paper with Mark Stevens in early 2010 on statistical methods for analyzing clinical trial data. And, get this, Dr. Clark was briefly a consultant for Walsh Pharmaceuticals before becoming an outspoken critic of pharmaceutical research practices. That can't be a coincidence, Daniel said. Dr. Clark might know what Mark discovered about Renovax. There's more, Alex continued, scrolling through her findings. After Mark disappeared, Dr. Clark published a paper questioning the methodology of several major drug trials, though he didn't name specific companies or drugs. The paper was largely dismissed at the time, but 2 years later, he was vindicated when another researcher found similar issues with data reporting. We need to talk to him, Rebecca said firmly. Alex nodded. I'll set up a meeting. And while we're preparing for that, I want to look into something else. Catherine Walsh made a substantial donation to a Caribbean medical charity the month after Mark disappeared. It could be a coincidence, or it could be how she channeled the payment to Mark, Daniel finished, especially if she wanted to keep it off the books. Exactly. I'll trace the money trail, see where it leads. Alex closed her laptop. We're making progress, but remember, if our theories are correct, we're dealing with people who are willing to threaten or harm Mark to keep him quiet. We need to be careful. Catherine implied as much when she warned me to leave the past. Buried, Daniel admitted. Said it could put everyone I care about in danger. Rebecca's eyes hardened with determination. After 15 years of wondering, of blaming myself, I'm not backing down now. Whatever the truth is, whatever Mark did or why he left, I need to know. Northwestern University Medical School stood imposing against the gray Chicago skyline, wind whipping off Lake Michigan as Daniel, Rebecca, and Alex made their way across campus. The journey to Chicago had been tense, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts about what they might discover. Dr. Nathan Clark met them in his office, a cluttered space filled with books, papers, and framed scientific illustrations. In his mid-60s, with a trim white beard and penetrating eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he greeted them with cautious courtesy. When you called about Mark Stevens, I wasn't sure whether to agree to this meeting, he admitted, gesturing for them to sit. That's a name from the past I've tried to forget. You knew him well, Alex asked. Well enough to respect his intellect and integrity, Dr. Clark replied. We collaborated on research methodology for clinical trials, specifically how to identify statistical anomalies that might indicate manipulation of data. Dr. Clark, Daniel said, we believe Mark disappeared because he discovered problems with data from Walsh Pharmaceuticals trials for a drug called Renovax. The professor's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his desk. What makes you think that? Daniel explained about meeting Lily, finding Emma's journal, and the evidence they'd pieced together so far. As he spoke, Dr. Clark's professional composure gradually gave way to a mix of resignation and old anger. I always wondered what happened to him, he said when Daniel finished. The official story that he simply vanished never made sense to me. You knew he was investigating Renovax? Rebecca asked. Not at first. Mark contacted me in early 2010 about collaborating on a paper, purely theoretical work on statistical methods. It was only later, in August, that he called me in a state of considerable agitation. He said he'd applied our methodology to a real-world case and found disturbing patterns. Did he tell you it was Renovax specifically? Alex pressed. Dr. Clark nodded slowly. Not initially, but eventually yes. He sent me anonymized data sets that showed serious adverse events being systematically underreported. When I analyzed them, the manipulation was clear to anyone with statistical training. Patients experiencing certain side effects were being removed from the trial under various pretexts, their data excluded from final reports. What kind of side effects? Daniel asked. Severe cardiac complications. Renovax was supposed to treat arrhythmia, but in some patients it appeared to trigger sudden, catastrophic heart failure. The official trial reports attributed these events to pre-existing conditions, but Mark's analysis suggested otherwise. Rebecca leaned forward. Did Mark tell you he was planning to go to the FDA with this information? Yes, but he was scared, said he was being followed, that his apartment had been broken into. Dr. Clark removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose wearily. I tried to convince him to let me take the lead. I had tenure, institutional protection, but he said it was too dangerous for anyone else to be involved. What about Emma? Walsh? Alex asked. Did Mark mention her? A shadow crossed Dr. Clark's face. He mentioned he'd found an ally inside Walsh Pharmaceuticals, someone with access to additional data. He never named her, but he said this person was facing even greater risks than he was. Did you ever hear from Mark after he disappeared? Daniel asked. No, but about a week after he vanished, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB drive containing all of Mark's research on Renovax, along with a note that said simply, "Hold this, don't act unless necessary." Daniel, Rebecca and Alex exchanged looks of excitement. Do you still have it? Alex asked urgently. Dr. Clark hesitated. I kept it secure for years, waiting for, I don't know what. For Mark to return, I suppose. When Walsh Pharmaceuticals was acquired. In 2015, I thought the danger had passed. I considered going public with the information, but by then, Renovax had been on the market for years. Making accusations without Mark's testimony would have been legally risky. But do you still have the USB drive? Daniel pressed. No, Dr. Clark admitted. About 3 years ago, I received another anonymous package. Inside was a brief note asking me to destroy the drive and all related materials. It wasn't signed, but 3 years ago, Rebecca repeated. That's when Emma Walsh died. Dr. Clark looked surprised. I didn't know that, but it would explain the timing. Dr. Clark, Alex said carefully, even if you destroyed the original evidence, did you make copies? Notes? Anything that could substantiate what Mark discovered? The professor was silent for a long moment, studying them. Finally, he walked to his bookshelf and removed a thick medical textbook. From inside its hollowed-out pages, he extracted a small, external hard drive. "I couldn't bring myself to destroy it completely," he admitted. "Too many years as a scientist, I suppose. The evidence was too important. I kept this backup, encrypted and hidden. I've never accessed it since making the copy." He handed the drive to Alex, who accepted it reverently. "This could be what... We need to understand why Mark felt he had to disappear," she said. "If your theory is correct," Dr. Clark warned, "this information was dangerous enough that people were willing to threaten Mark's life over it. Be careful how you use it." As they prepared to leave, Rebecca turned back to the professor. "One more question, Dr. Clark. In your professional opinion, if Renovax was as dangerous as Mark believed, what would have happened if it had been approved and released to the public?" Dr. Clark's expression was grim. "Based on what I saw in Mark's data, potentially hundreds of deaths that would have appeared to be from natural causes, sudden cardiac events in patients who already had heart conditions. Nearly impossible to trace back to the medication unless someone was specifically looking for the pattern." Outside the medical school, as they walked back to their hotel through the biting Chicago wind, the implications of what they'd learned hung heavy between them. "If Dr. Clark is right," Daniel said, "Mark uncovered evidence that could have destroyed Walsh Pharmaceuticals and sent its executives to prison. Motive enough to threaten him," Alex agreed, "or to offer him money to disappear. But not enough for Mark to take it," Rebecca insisted. Not unless he was protecting someone," Daniel finished. "Emma, maybe, or..." He stopped. Abruptly, as realization dawned, Emma was already pregnant when Mark disappeared. If he knew that, if he was trying to protect his unborn child, he might have taken the money and disappeared rather than risk their safety by going public, Alex concluded. It would explain why he left without a word. Any contact with his old life could have put everyone at risk. Rebecca was quiet, processing this new perspective on the man she'd once planned to marry. Finally, she spoke. "I still don't understand why he didn't come back after Richard Walsh died. Catherine's husband passed away nearly 10 years ago. If the threat was gone, why stay away?" "That," Alex said grimly, "is what we still need to find out. And I think the answer might be on this hard drive." As they continued toward their hotel, none of them noticed the dark sedan parked across the street, its driver speaking quietly into a phone as he watched them walk away.